everything we do, there's a purpose behind it. So like there's no, what I always say, there's no fluff about it. It's not like we're ever gonna go out to just do random technical work. And I swear, it sounds arrogant saying it, but they have no idea what they're watching.
I know.
They have no idea what they're watching. They're watching running and kicking. I'm watching underlaps, clearing space, pulling defenders. You know what I mean? Any coach can take that advice and go, that's a great idea. They'll say it for a week max, but then they'll forget.
They'll stop.
I like to tell my players, Monday through Friday, it's about self-improvement. You're really hard on yourself. You critique everything. You chase perfection. You turn over every stone. It's not good enough. It's got to be better. But on game day, you're the opposite. You're kind of your own best friend, your biggest fan, and you're like, hey, you can do this.
I just changed the perspective of coaching. Like when I'm hearing you talk about this, because now a lot of things are coming together. All right, this is EvoToca, where we bring coaches who have different perspectives to give us their insight on things that they do within their teams to help educate us other coaches so that we can improve, not just improve our coaching, but in order to improve the quality of players that we develop. Today I have on Christian Silva. I've known Christian Silva since like 2009 maybe, or 2010. And we played college soccer together. And it's amazing to see what he has done now, man. I never would have imagined it as far as like at the age you're at. The players you're developing, man. But Christian Silva is the owner and founder of Silva Academy. He has 2 teams, 2010s, 2012s. He holds trainings and camps for kids. And Christian, before I actually wanted to start, man, I saw your Instagram page, and it's like, the first sentence is an intentional approach to technical development, creating dominant, complete footballers. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, intentional for me is the key word, meaning like kind of a little bit what we talked about a second ago is like every drill, every session, even our style of play that we play that for me is from the top down, from my top team to my younger team. Everything we do, there's a purpose behind it. So like there's no, what I always say, there's no fluff about it. It's not like we're ever going to go out to just do random technical work. It's like there's a progression to it. There's a thought behind it. Even with my center backs, for example, like their training involves a lot of 1v1 work. And as they get older, it's very intentional where, a center back doesn't have to do, a bunch of flare stuff, right? They don't need to be doing double scissors out of the back, but they do need to be able to solve 1v1 scenarios. So for me, for example, and again, I'm getting long-winded with it, but like, the center backs have a lot of frontal 1v1s and lateral 1v1s. So they'll get a lot of reps doing that during the week, a lot more as the week tailors off. So they're ready to execute and kind of see those patterns in a game. So like the intentional for me is the most important word there, because the why behind everything is thought out. Whether it's perfect or not, that's one thing, but it's thought out. It's kind of comes from a place of, are they going to need this? Are they going to use this? Or the opposite, are they going to run into this? Right? So it's like, for me, I always think it's equipping the player with them being able to recognize scenarios and situations. And then obviously an intentional approach to create technically dominant and complete footballers. It's that, it's them being able to fly on their own when they leave my program. They're technically complete players. They're comfortable on the ball. They're comfortable in what I call all 4 different 1v1 scenarios. They know how to combine. They know how to play. They know how to solve situations. They can interpret space. It's the full package of equipping them technically. I wouldn't say tactically, but just understanding the game in a universal way. You know, if
Okay.
you have space, take it. If you don't have space, move it or create it. You know, little basic principles that for me are universal that they can take and apply on any team when they leave me.
Man, nice, man. And to go into the next part, man, I just want people to know a little about you, man. And for the first question is, what sparked your interest in the game of soccer?
As a player, I mean, really, it was just my pops. I mean, I always tell people now, because obviously I have a 15-month-old daughter. Kids want to imitate. Kids will kind of follow what their parents are passionate about. And I grew up on Argentinian football and obviously the Peruvian national team. So as a kid, watching my dad be so passionate about it, it obviously caught my interest. And, you know, being South American, that was always something that was in and around my childhood. So naturally, I fell in love with it right
Mm-hmm.
away. Obviously, I'm the youngest of two, so my older brother played. I think that's something younger brothers always have an advantage with, is you always kind of want to beat your older brother. So I was
Yeah, it is.
instantly hyper competitive as a kid, and I think that kind of complemented it well, where I fell in love with the sport and I was hyper competitive with it because I wanted to catch my brother. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just, you know, and here we are. About
But you would
5, 6 years.
say, yeah, you would say mainly it's from, like you said, wanting to be like your father, wanting to imitate what he did is what sparked it.
Yeah, I would say so. Because again, like my father was an influence. My brother played. It was always around me, so it was kind of like naturally something that was in front of me and that I picked up.
Okay. And would you say at that point, that's also what made you fall in love with the game,
To be
as
honest,
opposed
no,
to more than just an interest?
no. Because I'll be honest, I actually fell out of love with the game. I remember clearly. It was like 12 years old. Because
Oh wow.
it was really intense. I had an amazing coach, Joseph Schultz. He was part of Schultz Academy. Someone who I drew a lot of inspiration from, for me, who was a mentor. But at the time, as like a 10, 11 year old, this was a world renowned coach. He actually started the original curriculum for what turned out to be IMG Academy Soccer. Um, he, he played the highest level of Austrian football. He coached Mario Kempes, the Argentinian legend. I mean, this guy was
Oh yeah.
a,
Okay.
a globally recognized coach. And he came and started his own club in Boca Raton. And you're talking, this is like a 6'5" Austrian, bald, thick accent. So it was so intense that for me,
Mm.
I wouldn't say I burnt out, but I got sick of it for a little bit. And the
So
2002
what is
World
it that burnt you out exactly?
It was just a constant, like, it just, I still remember to this day, it was like there was never any positive coming out. It was like, oh,
Oh,
you did this wrong,
okay.
you did this wrong, you did this wrong, and it's like, I do something right, and then it was like, yeah, but you did this, this, and this wrong. And I was
Yeah,
like,
okay.
am I doing anything right, or is it just, you know what I mean? So for me,
Yeah.
and not even for me, as an 11-year-old at the time, it was like, okay, where's like, if I'm not finding success, and I'm just getting ripped into every game. And it was such a hassle because it was an hour away from our house, so it's like an hour drive, dreading training at the time, dreading training, getting ripped
Hmm.
into by a coach, going back home, like games. I was nervous because all it was, he wasn't joysticking,
Hmm.
but he was very firm and direct, and I think it caught me off guard because that was my first taste of very intense, hyper competitive. I mean, Josie Altidore was on my team. I mean, that was an
Hmm.
amazing team that, that there were standards with it. And for me, it was kind of like a reality check. Obviously at 11, 12 years old. So I got sick of it for a few months, but then the 2002 World Cup just like reignited that love. And I would say that's when I truly fell in love with the game. Like just
And
watching
what
the
is it
World
about that
Cup.
World Cup?
I don't know. I think it was honestly just like everything about it. Obviously the playing, but I mean, this was the 2002 Korea Japan World Cup, so you had to wake up at 6 a.m. to watch the games.
Correct.
And just that whole memory, and I'll probably nostalgia now, but getting up 5:30 a.m., trying to sneak in a breakfast, watch the first World Cup game. You know, you see the ceremonies, the passion, and obviously it's summertime, so after that, after the first few games, we would go out to the neighborhood park and play World Cup, that kid game, where it's like 1 against 10, going to one goal. And it's just like kind
Hmm.
of that mixture of the 2002 World Cup, waking up early, going out and playing it and trying to imitate what we saw. That summer, I would say, was like when I truly fell in love with the game.
Man, yeah, the culture, man. I've talked to a lot of coaches about that. How, like, for example, it's often in America. It's changing a little bit now, but you'll know when you grew up, the opportunities that kids had to watch these European games was nowhere near as much as it is today. And then for kids to be able to watch pros and superstars regularly, it really changes how you approach the game.
It really does, man.
So we definitely need more of that.
I mean, it's
And
just a different
in
world
terms
now. I mean,
of
access to games, the access to like kids can watch. Kids have TVs in their hands now. You know what I mean? They can pop
mhm,
on. Like you remember back in our day, we had to download highlight videos for like 3 days on LimeWire just for a 30-second video. Now you can pop up YouTube all day if you want.
yeah, man. Yeah, so true, man. And in terms of the transition that you've made to coaching, what is it that sparked this interest or this love from playing to coaching? Because obviously it doesn't happen to all players. Some players they play and they want to quit, but what drew you towards coaching?
There's a few things, man. I'll say this. Right now, I wear two different hats, and that's something that it took me, I wouldn't say took me a while, but it was something I really had to think about and think deeply about where when I stopped playing professionally, I spent, and obviously you can attest to this because you and I were together training in our off seasons. Obviously, when I left
Hmm.
USF, we were training together technically almost every night. You remember, like
Hmm.
almost till 11 p.m. some nights.
Yeah.
And I always had that work ethic, but within that work ethic, and I put you in that same. You and I had this infatuation with technique, like this
Yeah.
love for technique. Just
Yeah.
like I remember you
Yeah.
and I still have a vivid memory. You and I would rave about how good the Zidane 21st Century Portrait movie was. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Just like, and for me, that's a different hat. That's the hat of a trainer. Is the infatuation with technique, and obviously when I stopped playing, naturally I wanted to help players out. Like, hey, look, try this. You know, try and get through this technical, benchmark. Work on this touch. So I always had the technical passion for the game, but then I played central midfielder. I was more of a holding midfielder most of my career. So
Hmm.
being at the center of the pitch, there's more the coach's personality you develop. As you get older, it's like you have to be aware of everybody's position. You have to make sure you're the communicator. You have to make sure you're
Correct.
giving info and setting the team up. And, I always say thinking pessimistically while we're attacking, I'm setting up the back line just in case to lock them in. While we're defending, I'm looking for, the outlets to attack. It's like you're always thinking the opposite as a center mid. So it's like, I always had that love for organization, and then add to that I've been a Cruyffista and a Guardiolista forever. That was just a perfect blend of like, I have a vision for how I love watching the game. I love training technically, and I have I would say, background of making sure I understand everyone's position. So it's kind of like a natural next step is like, now as a coach, I want to bring to life that picture of like, hey, this is how I would have loved to have played. You know, and I always say I would have loved to have played for me because the things my team does,
Yes,
I'm like, man, wish, I wish like
yes,
I could plug in a Kevin O'Lally on the wing and isolate him. You know, a Christian Silva at the holding mid who just keeps the game
yes.
ticking. It's like, you know, for me, it's also still part of that childhood, like, not childhood, but childlike, you know, infatuation with like, this is how I think the game should be played. And, you know, I mean, everybody has their own interpretation. So wearing those two hats, when I retired playing, I had a lot of offers to jump in pro coaching right away as an assistant, but doing it
Mm-hmm.
myself offered me the opportunity to wear both those hats, meaning being a technical developer and a developer of talent, but also as they've gotten older, now we're diving a little like more into the tactical concepts, how we want to play, you know, how do we solve
Mm-hmm.
these scenarios. So for me, it's the best of both worlds wearing both those hats.
Do you think you'll ever become a pro coach? That desire?
Honestly, yes, I do. But not immediately. Because for me, right now, I'm in a spot where, just like I said, I love what I do because it's all about control, you know, and I can control the environment. I can control the technical development. I'm in charge of what they're working on. And with pro coaching, number one, it's very fickle. I mean, you lose 3 straight games, you may be on the chopping block. But number two,
Mm-hmm.
with pro coaching, you're almost, and again, I don't believe you can have a firm style of play when you're starting out as a pro coach. Why? Because the level of your players dictates what you can do.
Mm, that's true.
You get what I mean? So it's like
Yes.
I can be
Yes.
a Cruyffista and maybe my first opportunity, they don't have a single center back who's comfortable on the ball. Maybe they don't have a
Yeah.
single center back who's comfortable with changing tempos in the game. Maybe he's just a ball winner. You know, maybe my center backs are just ball winners as well, where I'm like, okay, if you're going to do your job properly, you have to put your ego aside and go, what do I have at my disposal? And how do I play to my players' strengths?
Yes.
And I think that lack of
Yes.
control for me is, I'm like, yeah, I could, hey, 2 ball winning center backs, you know, we've got to get results because it's results based at that point. You know, there's a way to win with them, but that doesn't, that's not fun for me. You know, I'm like, we can win, but if we
Yeah.
win playing a low block and looking for the counter, I'm like, all right, I'm not, this isn't fun for me, you know?
So if you were, are you saying that you would be very selective about which pro team you go to? Or
Either
would you be
very
willing to start
selective
anywhere?
or I'd be willing to start anywhere, but I think it's a little bit of a caveat, right? Because I would want a bit, because the thing with pro coaching is a lot of the coaches don't have full control of their roster. And that's something I lived as a player. For
Yeah.
example, when I went to Sweden and I signed for a second division team, the president wanted me, the coach didn't. So it's like, for me, I put myself in
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah, I've heard
coach's
of that
shoes. I'm like,
before.
wait, if he didn't like my profile of player, I'm in a way kind of like throwing a wrench in his plans. So I think as a
Mm-hmm.
coach, I wouldn't say necessarily selective because you can't really be selective out the gate. You know, you got to pay your dues and start from the bottom or maybe start from a
Mm-hmm.
lower level team, which for me is not the problem of the level, but it's like I would need to have a bit more say in whether it's player selection, whether it's bringing players up from the youth,
I
whether
see.
it's what type of profile player I'm looking in certain positions. Like I would at least appreciate that a lot more. And again, that's kind of what holds me out of the pro game right now is like, even as an assistant, because for me, I wear my heart on my sleeve, man. If I'm not passionate about what I do, I don't want to do it. I'm very simple like that.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't love it, I won't do it. So, for example, as an assistant coach, if I get a great pro assistant job, right? And I'm coaching for, let's say, a very old school, direct English coach, I'm like, I don't believe in this. So I'm helping him paint a picture that I don't believe in. I can't do it with my full heart.
Hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean. I
So
know
I
what you
think that's
mean.
what kind of
And,
keeps me where I am now, where it's like, I love it because I can, not so much not having a boss, but it's like, hey, I want to play a certain way. I've got to develop my players a certain way. My center backs have to be able
hmm
to, eliminate one forward off the dribble. They have to be able to carry the ball into the midfield. They have to understand and be brave stepping into the midfield with the ball to draw a defender out so then they can break a line. Like, I can control that environment.
yeah, so with you, you have to make sure that the president is in alignment with your vision in your case,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah,
just
I
liking
think
you.
that's something that would be huge. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
I would say I'm very much a purist in that regard. Is like, I want to play a certain way. Cause it's how I enjoy it. It's how
Yeah.
I love it. And for me, it's how the game makes sense to me. If we try and play and
hmm
they try to deny, there's this, and this we can do. But if we're just doing, I don't know, if we're just like a very vertical team, three passes and we're at the goal, I'm like, I don't understand the game like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, man. I
it
know what
doesn't
you
make
mean,
sense to me
man.
like
Yeah. And man, Christian, man, now I wanted to go to some content I've seen with you on social media just to get some more insight in terms of what your beliefs are.
for sure.
And one of the sayings that I thought I was very caught off guard in a good way is when you said, I thought about it, but I never worded it like that. You're like self acceptance versus self improvement. Do you know which one
Yeah,
I'm talking about?
yeah, you're talking about the interview with
Yeah, can you
Replayer.
explain that? Yeah. Yeah, could you explain that a little?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it comes from my psychology background, which I always liked psychology, but I really got into psychology during my time in Europe because I would spend my whole time thinking, how can I improve? How can I improve? And, I'm technically very sound. I wouldn't say mastered, but I'm very comfortable on both feet. So what's the next kind of bridge I need to cross? It's like, okay, I gotta get my mind right. So that whole thought process came up where I like to tell my players Monday through Friday, it's about self-improvement, meaning you're really hard on yourself. You critique everything. You chase perfection. You turn over every stone. It's not good enough. It's got to be better. But on game day, you flip it. You kind of turn the volume down on self improvement, turn the volume up on self acceptance, which means now you're like, hey, even if I take a bad touch, I can still solve this situation. Even if maybe I don't feel my fastest, I can still solve this scenario. I've just got to outsmart them. Even if the opponent is, technically better than us, we've got to understand spacing so we can, try and find a weakness. It's almost like, and another way to word it, for example, because for me, a lot of it stems from the thought process of trying to be perfect, right? And if you're trying to be
Mm-hmm.
perfect, for example, let's say, I don't know, you don't get a good night of sleep the night before a game. If you're thinking in terms of perfection, your mind goes to, uh-oh, I didn't sleep well, I'm not going to play well. But if you switch to self-acceptance, you can have a terrible night of sleep and go, hey, it doesn't matter. My training is going to pay off. Anything that
hmm
I can do with 4 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep, no sleep. It doesn't matter who's in front of me. I'm good enough to beat them. And that's kind of how I word it, where it's like Monday through Friday, you're highly critical of yourself. Saturday, Sunday, you're the opposite. You're kind of your own best friend, your biggest fan, and you're like, hey, you can do this. You know what I mean? So you kind of switch
Yeah.
from critiquing everything you do to saying, hey, even if I took a bad touch, it's okay. The game's not over. Even if I missed a shot, it's okay. I'll make the next one. But like you kind of, you completely 180 there. And that's kind of something that you have to grow in controlling, because your mind is what's going to control how you perform.
Yeah, and Christian, man, that's the perfect mindset for any player in an environment, because when you talk about going to Europe, it's not just soccer. It's a whole culture. Like, people see you as an outsider when you're new. So they're going to be more critical of certain mistakes or errors that you do. And sometimes they're not, but it's much more in your head. And I think this is why many people in games, I've seen it so many times, but I know you have too, and they have the opposite mindset. So they're practice players, they're amazing, but in the game they're critical of themselves. So they can perform in practice, but they can't perform in the game because in the game they're trying to be perfect. They're too critical, too much self improvement.
Right.
But in the practice, it's like carefree. Yeah. And I actually
Yeah,
on
I
what
mean,
you said, I don't know
you
if it's
said it
exactly
perfectly.
the
You're
same, but I try
completely
to do this
backwards.
with. Yeah, I mean, and one thing that I try to do with coaching, it's not exactly the same, but in what you said, I think about when I coach my 6 and 7 year olds, where a lot of the times you have a tendency to want to coach a lot, but you have to remind yourself that once they're in the game, you don't want to be that joystick coach, right? So what I do is, like, in my trainings with the kids, I'm very careful about how they execute the drills. But once they're in the game, I let them play. I'm not too careful about, oh, he didn't do this. Oh, you need to do that. I let them play. Whereas a lot of other coaches, like, hey, you got to do this. You got to do that. And especially for 6 and 7 year olds, and it depends on what you want to do. But I want players that are creative and free. But I really, really like that expression, man. It's really good.
Can
And
Vinny?
another thing that I want to talk about is, I saw in your clips the combination plays that your team does, and I wasn't looking at the ball, or as a coach, I don't just look at the ball. I was looking at your players when they didn't have the ball. I noticed they check over their shoulders a lot. And at that age, it's unbelievable that they do it so regularly. Yeah, man, I noticed with your teams, they're so good at that age. It's amazing that they just check over their shoulders. And it's not just one player, it's multiple players. So what do you do to get your players into this habit of checking over their shoulders, especially at that age?
I mean, nothing crazy. There's some things I do where, for example, I try and get creative. Like I'll do, if we're doing ball mastery, I'm holding up pennies or I'm holding up numbers. Nothing crazy. I have an iPad that I created my own color videos on, like an editor, and just the screen goes blue, red, green, or yellow. Occasionally, um, depending on what phase we're in, like for example, if we're in the middle third, I'll bring that out and we'll do passing patterns, but related to how we play. So for example, we're very big on finding the third man. We're very big on taking space, carrying the ball, and drawing a defender out. So I'll design a passing pattern, but I'll have the iPad set up like at the very end of it, and they all have to respond to whatever color pops up, or at the very least say it.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're used to doing things while scanning and looking
Yes.
forward. And then I kind of progress that to, I'll do, for example, rondos where let's say it's 5v3 and you can, transition and break out into another box, right? But you can't transition to the another box until the iPad shows green. So until then,
Oh.
you've So you've got to keep possession
Yeah.
and be comfortable in keeping possession while looking for the right time to go. And then when it goes green, now you can go.
Man. So you're
But
always adding an element where it's dependent on another stimuli. So you can't just go off of when you want to go.
right.
It depends on another stimuli or something else happening, and you have to be aware of the whole surrounding, not just what you feel like doing. But man, that's really good.
Well, that's from the stimuli point. But then, for example, even if it's a passing pattern, or let's say we're doing something simple like, I don't know, like if we're doing like a passing square, for example, right? Just a simple passing square. I always tell them 3 habits, well, technically 4 habits every single time we do any pass. 4 things have to happen in sequence within a 1-2 second window. And it's come off your defender or lose your defender, open your hips, scan, and demand the ball. Those 4 things have to happen within 1 Mississippi of you wanting the ball. Get open, scan, shape your body, demand the ball. So,
Okay.
and it's repetitive. I sound like a broken record, but I've had, for example, my oldest team going on year 3 every single day. Open your hips, scan. Open your hips,
Yo.
scan. And it's repetitive. And for me, why? Because any coach can take that advice and go, that's a great idea. They'll say it for a week max, but then they'll forget.
They'll stop.
But for me, I always try and do every session, and I'm sure I'm very intense with my boys, but I put myself in their shoes in the session. So I'll coach it as if I'm in the drill and I'm one of the captains of the team and I'm trying to maintain the standard. Do you get what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah, I know
So,
what you mean.
because that puts me in the mindset of, okay, what do I need to do? What does he need to do? Because if I'm too much into that coaches thing, I'm observing more the bigger picture, which I want to do that if we're doing something tactical. But if we're doing something technical, I'm like, I want to be in the trenches with them and be like, okay, what do we need here? And if I was a captain of this team, what would they need now? And what would I
Mhm.
need to do now by example? So it's kind of like I hold them to that standard when it comes to the technique part.
So on this rondo, like you're saying that it's impossible for a player to receive a ball without doing those 4 things.
No, not at all. They'll do it and they'll forget. I mean, it's they're kids, you know. I think you can't ever underestimate the rate of forgetting. Meaning,
Mm.
when you teach something, there's a curve. They'll remember it, they'll apply it, they'll get comfortable, they'll forget. So they'll do it all the time. They're not perfect by any means. I mean, something you always got to remember is Instagram is always the best clips, you know?
Hmm.
So the reality is they're human. They do make mistakes, but there's always an accountability. Like they're never getting through a rondo without me telling them scan, shape your hips, pace your pass. Are you punching the ball in? If you want your teammate to turn, you have to punch it in. If you want them to play one touch, you have to hit it softly so they can run onto it. Like little things like that where I'm nitpicking. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about. Monday through Friday, I'm nitpicking every little detail. Pace your pass, punch the ball in, turn on the ball. Can you do that in less touches? Can you do that in more touches to slow the tempo down? But as far as with the rondos, no, but again, everything has its why, so every rondo is built with an element of going forward, for example. So it's not just possession for the sake of it, it's possession looking for an outlet. And then you add the stimuli of the iPad, now it's looking forward, but interpreting when to go forward.
Man, Christian, man, I'm gonna tell you, man, I've seen a ton of coaches, and when I hear like what you're doing, and you're doing it consistently. In terms of the U.S., I've never seen a coach be that rigorous about that aspect. Because normally coaches are rigorous about simple technique passing, but in terms of building awareness and knowing and being a step ahead of everyone else. And because, like you said, in 6 weeks, 6 months, you may not see the things you want, and you can let those fall by the wayside because those are not the things that automatically win you games. Normally, as a coach, you'll focus on things that win you games immediately. So when those things, you're like, why am I even focusing on it? And it's not helping me win games. But you've been rigorous to the point that it's like second nature.
I mean, bro, that's spot on, and it's tricky, right? Because like having a youth team, you've got to account for the parents. And for example, my oldest team has gotten to the point where they're a very strong team, but you can't lose sight of what we're doing. We're a very strong team. For example, we went and played Inter Miami. Tough game, we got beat. But for me, I'm like, I don't pretend to care so much about beating them. I want us to execute our higher level things against them. I want you to be able to find a pocket in their midfield because they're going to be organized. I want you to be able to recognize when to step into the midfield. I want you to be able to recognize when to, go inside to attract centrally to then go wide, or backwards, go wide to attract them and then go inside. Like little things like that where it's like, I'm very competitive. You know exactly how I was as a player, but I'm like, for me, competitiveness have shifted not so much for winning games, but like the performance. How did you guys do? Did you put our work on display, or did you leave it on the practice field?
Correct. And one thing about your playing, one thing I know is that you were very consistent in terms of like training, whether it was on your own or with other people, or when there was no other way. Like, for example, in college in the spring, we can't really train with the team much. But I know in terms of like your individual training, you were rigorous. Like it was very consistent, but that's still really hard, man. Like what you're doing, it's so hard. And I've been working on that for like the last maybe 3 or 4 months. Obviously, when I hear you, you're way advanced in terms of some of the things you apply, but I'm committed to like stay on it and harp on it for a long time. So that's good to hear from you, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than us as players, I still, like I said, and I think what helps me is kind of when we're doing technical work or trying to implement a technical concept, I genuinely do try and put myself in the mindset of like, okay, I'm in this session. I'm not running it. I'm in it. Because then I'm looking at it like a player and I'm like critiquing like a player, which for me, I think that's a good thing to do with technique, because you're holding a player accountable. Like for me, I kind of view it like I'm the veteran of the team and I'm getting on the freshman. Like, hey, look, there's a way we do things here that, you got to fall in line. Because then that's creating like just an accountability within the group. Like you can tell my players who have been with me for a long time because now if I'm just quiet, you hear them going scan. First, like if, for example, if we, for example, swing the ball from one side to the other and we have a player isolated, you'll hear my longtime players go, first touch, aggressive first touch into the space, take the space. And it's like, for me, that's the proud moment versus like,
that's satisfying.
I don't care about we beat this team. I care about that's a kid playing a year up and he could essentially run this session now because he understands the game.
Yes, man. So true. And I wanted to, and this again goes into, I mean, I know you as a player, but in terms of a coach being able to transfer that over to other players, when I watch the clips that you have and I see the creativity of the players, what are some ways you encourage this to the point that they're able to execute this in game situations? So obviously, to execute some of those skills, they're very advanced. And I can imagine that in reaching that level, you will have had to have made many mistakes like that in a game before to get to that comfort level. So like, what are some things you say or do as you coach to encourage that level of creativity?
I think it's twofold. I'll tell my players and at least try and hold them to a standard where if you're gonna do something in a game, you better have worked on it. Do you get what I mean?
Mm,
It's like,
yes.
don't,
Yes.
don't show up to game day and try and do a triple scissor when you've never done it in training or I've never seen you do it on your own. Do you get what I mean? It's
Makes
like,
sense. Makes
I
sense.
kind of view it in the way of like how you and me were. You and me would try, all our skill moves, but we would do them every single day.
Yep.
When we
Uh-huh.
show up and try it, if we made a mistake, we're like, okay, I messed it up here, so I need to work on this part of it. Where,
Yes.
you get kids where I think creativity gets misinterpreted a lot with youth soccer. Because people think creativity is just flat out freedom to do dumb shit.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yes.
it's not what creativity is. Creativity is finding a way to solve a situation.
Correct.
Do you get it?
Correct.
Creativity is a means to an end. It's not, I want to do a trick. It's, I'm isolated 1v1. I don't have any clear passing lanes. I need to create a passing lane. How can I do that? Unbalance the defender. How do I do that?
100%.
With this skill
100%.
or this, do you get what I mean? It's like, so as far as getting the players to do it, I mean, obviously we work on skill moves. I think my biggest thing is them and again, it's kind of precursor, but it's recognizing space. It's
Mm-hmm.
recognizing space and recognizing the scenario. So for example, my winger, if he's isolated and we find him wide open with a 1v1, I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, go at him, beat him.
Mm-hmm.
Cause I want him to hear me go, and again, I'm sure there's the element of, I want him to have that tranquility to do it, but I want him to know, especially when they're young, this is a time to go. Like, your skill
Mm-hmm.
isn't something selfish. Your skill is helping the team because there's a mismatch here and you have the ability to create an advantage. So, not, we want you to do a trick. The team would need you to beat somebody 1v1 here. You get
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yes.
So,
No,
that's,
and I like what you said.
yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it is recognizing space and two, work on it. Like, if you're gonna do it, I better have seen it in training multiple times and you mess
Yeah.
up and you try and fix it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And then you pick, an arsenal of 2 or 3, what I call driving moves or 2 or 3 lateral 1v1 moves to escape pressure. But like, have your little arsenal and perfect your weapons. And then, yeah, go do them in a game. If you mess up, make sure you react in transitions and try and get it back. That's it. It's like,
And
if you're gonna
yeah.
do it confidently. And I'll tell my players all the time, because it gets misinterpreted. It's like, if you're stuck, example, facing your own goal, and you're a center back, yeah, I don't really want you to do a Maradona right there. Sorry. That's probably not the best time to do it. And
Yeah.
that's stealing creativity, but it's like you gotta understand your percentages. That's a very low percentage play. If you get it
Mm.
done, great. But there's a higher percentage you lose it, and that's not good decisions. Cause for me, this is the analogy I use, right? Cause you get parents, you get coaches that are like, kids need freedom. I'm like, no, there's a difference between creativity and bad decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, Harry Maguire, right? If
Mm-hmm.
he tries to dribble out of the back, which is not a skill set he has, and loses the ball, gets scored on, you're not gonna go, oh, he was trying to be creative. You're gonna go,
That was a
that
bad
was
decision.
a bad decision. I don't care even if he got it right, you would be like,
Mm-hmm.
that was a
Yeah.
bad decision. It's like, that was terrible, don't ever do that again.
Mm-hmm.
So, there has to be that element of helping them understand, okay, maybe it worked, but long term, that's a low percentage play. You want to use that as a last resort, not a first resort. But for example, a winger with space to go 1v1 and grass behind the defender with space to push into, yeah, you need to go at him because that's a mismatch.
And Christian, man, I think you said it very well in terms of what creativity is, because really creativity is how many ways can you solve a problem? So that if one problem is blocked, you have another solution. That's a
Right.
really good way of putting it, because in my mind, and I'm just thinking at the highest level, when I think of the most creative players, Messi, Maradona, those guys really didn't do a lot of fancy moves, but they could beat you in a multitude of ways. They could beat you on a run. They could beat you on a pass. Maybe I don't pass it here, but I pass it there. You know what I mean? So it's really how many ways, like you couldn't trap them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's such a good way. It's not about like, oh, I need to be able to do like 100 moves and then I'm creative. You know
Well,
what I
that's a
mean?
thing. Well, because it's a domino effect. And for me, I'm very critical of parents. And the reason behind it is you're the main source of info for the player. And if you're coming
Mm-hmm.
from an uneducated point of view, you're going to undermine what a coach is trying to teach. So for example, if you're trying to base your kid's confidence off of, did you do a cool trick today? Did you score a goal? Did you beat someone today? You're putting in their head, I have to do that. I have to do that. So what are they going to
Mm-hmm.
do? In a game, their mind isn't looking at playing what they see.
Yes.
Their mind is like, crap, I have to do something because mommy wants me to shine. And then
Correct.
there's so many things pulling them in different directions that it's like, you're not recognizing that there was no space there even before you received the ball. And that's where I'm like, your mind isn't here. You're thinking of what move you're going to do. You didn't even scan your environment to see, is there space? How do I solve? What's the solution? Then get to the point.
No.
You know what I mean? It's like, so I always word it this way. A parent can really hijack that, what I call is like that step 1, step 2, step 3. Scan for space. Interpret space. What's the solution? Now decide quickly. Because if they're making the decision before because mommy wants them to score a goal, it's like, well, now he didn't recognize he didn't have space to begin with. Or the opposite. He recognized there was space to begin with, but he already planned out a Maradona, and it wasn't that type of 1v1 scenario. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Man,
like,
Christian, I gotta tell you, man, and I just, my whole, see, my interpretation, like first off, I just changed the perspective of coaching, like when I'm hearing you talk about this, because now a lot of things are coming together. Like when you say creativity, it's about an awareness, knowing your surroundings. So that's actually the first thing in terms of creativity is knowing your surroundings. Because when you know your surroundings, you know all your options and you can be more creative. Like I never thought of it like that.
well, I'll word it this way. So you obviously you played between lines and you played on the wing. So and obviously you played
Yeah.
up top as well. I remember when you played forward, but for me, you were the most dangerous guy I've seen in years between lines because of your ability to receive and more importantly, your ability to turn. Like your lateral 1v1 ability in my eyes was one of the best I'd ever seen. And I say that because let's say you were between lines. Let's say you were playing left-sided attacking mid. And you scanned and saw that your far right winger's wide open before you received the ball. That's, for me, the precursor to creativity. How you get him the ball is now where you put your spin on it. It could be a first time around the
Oh, I see.
corner. It could be dribble your guy and find a through ball on the
I
floor.
see.
Or if you want to go some Ronaldinho, you can flick it up and volley it. It doesn't matter how you get there. It's the fact that you knew what you wanted to do. How you got there is up to you to interpret.
Uh, that's it. That's it, man. That blew my mind, man. Now my interpretation of creativity is so much different, but it does make a lot of sense when I see like the highest level players is that, and I go back to like Maradona, Messi, they're just like the most aware. You know what I mean? But
Some of those passes, like things like that, it's like he understood where the space was. Right?
yes, he
And
saw
now,
things other people didn't see.
yes, exactly. And when he makes that pass, you're almost like forced to run because you're like, oh, I didn't even see that space. And now I'm wide open.
Yeah. Man, Christian, man, that completely like changes my perspective in how I see the game or that aspect of the game. It's huge, man. That's amazing, man. But appreciate it, man. Wow. Um, and another thing I wanted to bring up is or probably one of the most watched clips in youth soccer. The one that has like 5 million views on TikTok, a million on Instagram. And one of the things that caught my attention, and I want to know your opinion about it, is the and you probably know what the most mentioned comment was
Yes, I do.
on that video was that pass. But I bring that up because I want to ask you, what do you think that says about the perspective of certain people within American soccer, within the American game?
Uh, Two words come to mind: outdated, and I would say they're just regurgitating something they heard someone say.
Mm,
And for me, that steals the ability to find solutions. Because again, creativity. For me, that my right-sided center back, Daniel Mejia, who mind you is playing a year up against some of the top, he's playing 1 year up performing against top 2012s. He's a 2013.
hmm
When you talk about breaking a press, a lot of people don't understand the context behind that video. That was the fourth time we played that team this season. And that was the second time we played them in 6 days.
mm Okay.
We had just beaten them 6-1. That game was a Saturday. We played them Sunday right before.
hmm
So they knew exactly how we built out, exactly how we, our shape, how we try and play. So they went, and I know the coach. He's a good coach, great guy. They studied film for hours on our build out, on how to mark us. So if you see, it wasn't, and again, and I'm being critical, it wasn't a great press because their forward was late. But when you read the comments, someone's like, the forward could have intercepted. And I
I
was
saw
like,
that.
if the forward was 3 steps higher, my center back breaks that line and finds the holding mid. So I'm
hmm
like, you're sorry, that's not an educated response.
Yeah.
And number two, if he passes to the keeper, the forward presses him. The only way out was skipping the keeper and going to the other center
hmm
back. And for
hmm
me, I'm like, I've never, if that pass gets intercepted, I'm telling him, hey, just punch it harder.
hmm
You know what I mean? Because I'm like,
Yeah.
if you saw that solution, hey, take it, And again, look what it led to.
Yeah, no. And it's funny, man. That's always where it starts.
Well, the center back to center back was one thing. When the left-sided center back found the left winger, there were 3 guys on that side where my
Yep.
left-sided attacking mid made the underlap aggressively. If he doesn't make that run, my left back or the left winger loses the ball. He had 3 guys on him. The
Yeah.
underlap everybody thinks the pass from center back to center back was amazing. For me, the biggest two parts there was the underlapping run from the left-sided attacking mid
Yes.
and the center mid with the orange cleats. His name's Andy. Him staying on the ball, dribbling for 3 touches to then find the winger who then played the opposite attacking mid who underlapped, who ended up scoring. Those two key moments are not big, they're huge, because if the underlapping run, the first one, doesn't happen, we don't get out. If the center mid doesn't stay on the ball and rushes that pass, he still has the same scenario in front of him. By him holding on to the ball, he moved 2 players out of position to create that passing lane.
And things like that, man, like when you look at the game at that level, that's really the exciting part. Because you're having an appreciation for the game, not just when goals are scored, but at almost like at every single moment. So how you're seeing the game, it's like when you talk about like the way that you talk, that's when you know, oh man, he sees the game on another level. But man, I know as a coach, like having an appreciation for things that people overlook, that like things like that gets you so excited. They're like sometimes better than the entertaining stuff.
100%, man. Because again,
Yeah.
it's things that us as players, and I would even go as far to say, like, 'cause I still remember you and I in college, like, raving over, like, I remember the website you gave me so we could download international matches. You remember that?
Yeah.
And to this day, I still try and find sites. For example, Bielsa's on Uruguay now. And I'm still like a little kid watching him like, wow, look what he's trying to do out of the back. Look at the movements between and things like that. Like, that's how I always was as a player. That's how you were as a player. And, seeing it now for kids to do it, it's like, damn, like, I learned this so much later than they're
Yes.
not just learning, but applying it week in, week
Yes.
out. And I think that for me, and I will say, I think that's a bit of the heartbreaking thing, is like, your environment's not going to know what they're watching. And
What do you mean? What do you mean?
so for example, if we, I don't know, let's say my older team or my younger team, if they lose a game, your environment, your parents are so reactive towards, we lost the game. I'm like, right, but look at what we did.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, I try and word it like, winning a game is not that hard. You put the ball in the net. You can put 3 fast guys up top, pump it long, lock them in. Winning a game is not satisfying. Breaking down a team, for me, like that chess match, is satisfying.
Yeah, the chess match.
It's also satisfying because your kids are learning things. Your kids are executing things where now you plug them into another environment. They're now thinking, how can I break the press? Where's the space? How do I solve this? And that's where, for me, like, I think it's awesome for us who appreciate it, like practitioners who love it, but it's always going to be an uphill battle to try and, have them understand it and then appreciate it. Because, and I swear, it sounds arrogant saying it, but they have no idea what they're watching.
I know.
They have no idea what they're watching. They're watching running and kicking. I'm watching underlaps, clearing space, pulling defenders.
Dude,
You know what I mean? It's like, you guys have no idea what you're watching.
no
so
idea at all.
And it's tough because I'm like, you don't see the growth and the progress. You see, did we score more than them? That's it.
Man, Christian, it's crazy. Man, I can't even tell. Man, dude, that can be a whole conversation. I don't even want to go that far, but the things,
No.
yeah, man.
No, but I will
Because
say it is, because when we get, for example, if one of my teams if we struggle to break down an opponent's press, I'm like, perfect. This is a learning opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we can get sharpened and kind of get punched in the mouth and try and weather it and see if we can find a solution where, obviously you'll get your environment that's like, put the tall guys up top and go for a corner kick. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, no, we're not winning anything there, We're not
Yeah.
learning, we're not
But,
improving. It's almost like a cop out.
but I think Christian, man, another thing too, and I think this is important is that, and especially when I look at your level of coaching, is that whenever you want to be like reach this level of seeing things, it's not only how many years you've been doing it, because there's a lot of people that are unintentional, but you're intentional about what you're doing. Like there are many people who probably been coaching for 50 years and they're the same level of coaches, but you're very intentional. Like before this podcast, how you were talking about every single session and that every player, every practice needs to get something out of it. That's rigorous.
It is, but I will say it's something you can only do if you have skin in the game. Because the reality is here at the club level, at least, the clubs are terrible. Don't get it twisted. The clubs are terrible here in Tampa. They're terrible. Why? Because the money's at the top with the directors, but the coaches get a part-time wage.
Yeah.
So you're gonna get a part-time effort. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
If you pay them $800 a month, I mean, you're asking for 4 or 5 days a week. So
Mm-hmm.
what? Plan a session, analyze a session, put thought into it? No. What they're going to do is think of a session on their drive over from work to the field and go, rondo, small-sided, big game, done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
it's
see what
like
you're saying. And
you can
yeah.
only do it. I have my name's on the jersey. I'm like, no offense, you're not wearing my name on your chest and not, you know what I mean? Not at least being ready for that battle. So I'm going to do everything I can to prep you for it, whether it's technically, tactically, and have you seeing the scenario multiple times during the week. So come game time, it's familiar to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, I can't imagine, coaching, like you said, coming up with drills like on your way to training. I can't imagine like approaching. I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying for me, and I know for
Yeah.
you definitely, but I couldn't even imagine like approaching it like that.
I mean, again, you've got to admire it because it takes a special person to get that low of pay and still want to help kids. But,
Mm.
and there's no malice in it. I don't think coaches are bad people, but it's kind of like, what do you expect? You pay them $800 a month. That probably buys you 30 minutes of time out of their day. Do you get what I mean? Because they have so many other
Mm.
things going on. They got bills to pay. They physically can't afford to give you more time to think of stuff. So,
Yeah, man, and nah, man, yeah, and Christian, man, I just wanted to wrap this up kind of like in a different direction because this is more tailored to your experience from being a pro and then a different side of the game. But on your website, I don't remember what page it was, but I have it and I'll read it here. It speaks about you. It says, while on his journey to become a professional football player, Christian had to overcome countless adversities. During this time, he developed an immense passion and appreciation for the psychology needed to succeed in the game, and he came to the conclusion that psychology in football is largely ignored or misunderstood. Having a mental skill set to overcome adversity or to bounce back from poor matches seems like a foreign concept to most. Instead, the traditional solution is try harder or toughen up. And he wanted to understand how the most successful players use their thoughts in pressure situations and how to make confident performances happen by choice rather than chance. And I say that because I have a tremendous appreciation for the psychological part of the game. And this is why I have so much respect for players like Messi and Ronaldo, because you're always like as good as much as you get praised, to be on that level where people want to take you out. They look at your plans. They come every game. They prepare for you. They try to kick you. They try to hurt you. There's you have a bad year. People are critical, and not even just that. Like even at the lower levels where people's self confidence is shot. Actually, they say that pros have the lowest self confidence because every practice, every game, you're being critiqued based off of performance. It's not about who you are as a person, and having that mentality to endure. But you can speak on that.
Yeah, I mean I think that for me all stemmed from, and I'll keep it real with you for a little bit, man. That's the reason I went to USF in the first place. I was
Mm-hmm.
in Argentina before USF.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was I kind of had a little bit of culture shock and I got really depressed for almost a year. And it
Mm-hmm.
got so bad that my dad was like, yo, just go have fun with your friends, man. Like you're not in a good space mentally. Like, so that's why I came back to America to go to USF because obviously my friend group was there, Santi, Brad, all those guys I knew, that it got so bad that my dad was like, look, you just need to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I wasn't in a great headspace at USF, so I was kind of like taking advantage of the social life, going out quite a bit, kind of getting it out of my system. And then after that first year, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, there's more to life than this. And that's when I left USF to go to Europe because I was like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
I fell out with the coach. Obviously, you remember all that. And I was like, you know what? I'm ready. You know, I had my college fun. I got it out of my system. I know there's much more to life. I want to go pro again. I want to try and, chase it. So that was a huge part for me because it showed me that if you're not good in a good mental space, it doesn't matter how good you think you are. Like you physically, like you have no driver to your car.
Mm-hmm.
So that I would say sparked my interest. And then during my career, as I was playing, as I was trying to get my first deal, it was just always going back to that was like, hey, look, like, if this isn't right, if your mind isn't right, it doesn't matter what you do with your feet, So I just kept diving deeper into, mental skill sets, like little things I kind of try and drip feed to my players. Like, for example, sometimes I'll test them. I'll go, hey, Messi gave the ball away yesterday, right? And he's like, yeah, I saw it. And I'll tell him, yeah, he's a terrible player. He's horrible. And they'll be like, what are you talking about? I was like, no, Messi's terrible. He gave the ball away. And they'll be like, no, he's not. He won the Ballon d'Or. He won the World Cup. I'm like, oh, so you're saying one mistake doesn't define him? They're like, no, are you crazy? And I'm like, okay, if you defend
I
Messi like
see.
that, why don't you defend yourself like that?
I see.
You get what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like, if you're so quick to jump in and go, who cares if Ronaldo lost and missed the penalty? He won last year and the year before. And I'm like, okay, so you are able to dig deep and
That's
find
a
reasons
good
why he's
point.
good. Why don't you defend yourself like that?
That's
Why
so
when you
true.
make, you know what I mean? Why when you make a
Yeah.
mistake, all of a sudden you're the worst player in the world?
Mm-hmm.
So little mental skill sets like that where I'm like, it's all about reframing your perspective on things. Like, and again, I bring the parents back up. Why? Because for me, they have the key to everything. Because they're the role model of the kid. And I always say, be careful with what you label.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because when you label it, you make it a thing. So for example, if a kid misses a cross, right? They're like, oh, my crosses suck. I'm a terrible player. And it's like, no, your crosses don't suck. You just had one bad cross.
Mm-hmm.
Or even going further, you just misplaced your plant foot. But if you label it as I can't cross, now you've created that in your head. Every time you go cross, you're going, crap, I
Yep.
can't cross. I hope it goes in because I'm not a good crosser. I hope I don't shank it. And it's like, no, you just planted your foot wrong. Fix that. You fix your cross. It's done. You don't need to think about
Correct. And that's, yeah, man, you can see that. Yeah, you can see that with some players. Like when you said you make a bad shot, then sometimes players like, I don't want to shoot anymore for the whole game. I'm just going to
it.
pass it to him or whatever.
Take it one step further. And this is for me one of the biggest pet peeves now. Parents will say they played bad, or for example, like I'll have players that, for example, they're in their head, they're not giving any effort, they're not giving intensity, right? And the parents will label it and go, they're not confident. And I'm like, that confidence and effort do not go hand in hand. I'm like, you don't need effort to track back. You don't need confidence to track back on defense.
Hmm.
You don't need confidence to press. You don't need confidence to react if you lose the ball. So I'm like, you're labeling and making confidence this big mystical potion that when you're confident, you'll score a hat trick. And it's not
Hmm.
how confidence works. Confidence is a decision.
Correct.
It's a decision to control your mind, weed out the dumb thoughts, and go, I don't care if I mess up or I score a hat trick. My mood and my energy is not going to change. That's what confidence is.
Correct.
Do you get what I
Correct.
mean? But you got these parents labeling confidence as if it's this big like, oh, little Johnny got screamed at. He's not confident now. It's like, no, that's not confident. So then what happens? They label it, and now the kid thinks, oh, I'm playing bad because I'm not confident.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, you're playing bad because you're choosing to be in your feelings. You're choosing to
Mm-hmm.
remember past mistakes, and you're not present in the moment going, what's next?
Correct. Man, Christian, man, that reframing is very, very good, man. The reframing is so important. To be honest, man, I wish I did better with that as a player. And sometimes I still struggle with it as a coach. Like you have a bad game and like it affects your whole day.
Oh, I mean, that's why I use the word reframing because, like, there's certain things you can't change. When we lose a game, dude, my wife knows, like, all right, leave him alone. Youth game, right? But it's like, that's just who we were. I don't like losing. And if we lose but play well, I'm okay.
Yeah,
But if
that's
we lose
fine.
and there was no effort or no intensity or this, I'm like, losing doesn't sit well with me.
Yo, Christian, I've won games where we played ugly and I left immediately.
Oh, I, it's funny because like, that confuses the players sometimes. Like, we won a game
Mm-hmm.
4-0. I'll never forget. It was this past season. We played PSG Academy from Miami. And they're a solid
Mm-hmm.
team. They're a very solid team. They play well. They have a very good methodology. The way they were killing us because they were inverting both fullbacks and overloading the midfield. And we could not find a solution. Like in the moment. We couldn't find it quick enough. My midfielders weren't reading cues. They weren't jumping up to the
Mm-hmm.
next press. They were getting destroyed. But their back line was small and we have this forward who's athletic. We scored 3 goals just strictly off of athleticism. And then I think
Mm-hmm.
we scored a PK, 1-4-0. Man, the whistle blew. I was just like, guys, go home. Like, I'm not going to say anything positive right now. Like, I was not happy at all. I was furious. I was like, we didn't play. We didn't get
Yeah.
anything out of that game. And I actually said it to a player because he was celebrating like crazy. And I'm like, what did you prove? All you proved is that you're stronger than a guy half your size.
Yeah.
You get what I mean? All you proved is you're
Yes.
faster than him. Cool. Congrats.
Yes.
Cause I'm like,
Yeah.
when you play someone who's your speed, now what do you?
You're done.
You know what I mean? It's like, what are you gonna do now? You're showing you have no resources there.
Correct. Correct. Man, Christian, man, this is the longest podcast I've done yet. And honestly, I could go on a whole lot more, but I gotta cut it short.
It's all good,
But,
man.
but man, everyone, man, thanks for joining. This is EvoToca. Stay tuned. Hey,